Life. We are so glad that you're here with us today, and welcome to the second week of a series that we've called Home for Christmas. You know, it's kind of that home for the holidays sentimental feel that we really look forward to this time of year, where we gather from all over the place and we warm our hearts with conversation and good meals and making memories that are going to last with us as we kind of depart and fellowship dissipates and we get involved in our busy lives. And for some of us, our relatives will drive away to wherever they live. But this home for the holidays concept is awesome. And we want to do everything we can throughout life to make sure that those rare moments are especially meaningful. Well, last week, if you were with us last week, we looked at two sides of the same coin. We talked about the investments we need to make as parents so that our children will want to come home when they no longer have to. And then we looked at the other side of the coin and we said, once our kids are grown and in their own houses, please, Jesus, in their own houses, right? What type of relational investments do we want to make with them so that we would want them, a desire for them to come home, right? Well, this week we're going to turn our attention to a narrower piece of the pie when it comes to the home for the holidays experience. We want to talk about what investments we need to make in the lives of our children so that they understand and are able to frame their own homes for the holidays, right? One that it would be a joy to visit, and one from which they could leave and come home for the holidays, right? Now, this has become an interesting conversation, and I understand that whenever we address issues specific to a generation, it is fraught with peril, right? And I just want to say that I am part of a 4-generation family. We're a very tight family, and I have been so blessed and benefited by people from every one of those 4 generations. Not here to knock on a generation. I'm here to, we're going to make some observations, and then how do we fortify that generation in particular? And so please hear my heart on that. That is my desire. Well, it was in 2011 that a movie came out called Failure to Launch. And those of us that watched that movie, and I was among them, we kind of laughed at it because it was just kind of funny. It was a funny movie and wasn't really a thing. It wasn't on anyone's radar. Well, a dozen years later, what wasn't really on our radar now is a cultural indicator for what's going on in our lives. Now, one more disclaimer here. I'm trying to keep my email load down this week, right? So one more disclaimer. If you are a young person living at your parents' house and you have a plan that you're working so that you won't always be there, way to go. We are here to cheer you on. Do not walk away from here discouraged, right? If you are living at your parents' home and you are of a certain age and you have no plan to get out of their house, please lean in right now. I'm trying to help your parents out right now, okay? But want to make some cultural indicators or observations on the front end, right? There are people way smarter than me who've been studying this phenomenon for the last 20 years. And so I did a ton of reading. So what I want to share with you in the first few minutes is not my material, but then we'll get into some of what God has to say about this in a moment. It was Jeffrey Arnett, who's probably the psychologist that has written the most on this. He wrote a book about the concept, and the book is called Emerging Adults. And he has said that adults in their 20s, that there are some developmental things happening there that are different than any other decade in their adult life. And maybe because of that, some of them have been a little resistant to moving out and framing their own home for the holidays. Well, a lot of people, sociologists in particular, are curious about this. And so what conclusions have they drawn? Well, I'm just going to share 4 of them. These aren't mine. These are from people probably a lot smarter and more educated than I am, but they made some observations or some conclusions about why this phenomenon is happening. The first, and this was top of everyone's list, is probably the most obvious. It's the financial reason, right? It's just sheer economics that great starter jobs that pay enough to support you and a family are not as plentiful out there in the current economy. And that's just true, right? But there's also another side to that, and that is the debt load side. So many of our students are coming out of college laden with credit card debt, laden with car debt, student loans. Of those who borrowed money during their college years, the average is about $45,000. Just so you'll know how old I am, I paid $58,000 for my first house, right? Which was maybe a better investment than a college education. So our students are coming out laden with debt. And so there's some real financial reasons why it's really hard to move on. Some sociologists have identified maybe more a sense of entitlement. We have a generation that has been told that they're special, that they have unique gifts and abilities, that they can be anything, or accomplish anything that they want to be or accomplish. And when that high sense of expectation isn't borne out by their experience, that can spin people out a little bit. Some have noted maybe a little more emotionally underdeveloped from previous generations, that there's not that tenacity that allows them to pursue career and family goals as vigorously. The final one was kind of a lack of strategic problem-solving skills. How do I solve the problem of a down economy? How do I solve the problem of starting wages aren't what I thought they were going to be? My debt load is higher than I thought it was going to be. So it's the strategic problem-solving skills, right? Those are the 4 that I found very common on a lot of the lists that I looked at. I would like to add one, just as an observation. Father raised 7, so an observation of mine. I would say that the sexual environment in our country has led to a bit of a failure to launch. I did a lot of research, pretty depressing to me, quite frankly. You see, one of the drivers when Diane and I were dating for us to get married early and get on with life was we wanted to be together, quite frankly, right? We wanted that intimacy that God says is designed for marriage. And so it was like, it's time to get married. Why? Because there was another clock that was going inside of us saying, no, it's really time to get married, right? I know I've shared this in at least one environment here before, but my oldest son was engaged to be married, and he let his mom and I know that they were going to get married. First of all, they were going to get married at Christmas time, which I never recommend based on what our family does in ministry. We're never really available to plan a wedding at Christmas time, and so we were a little bent about that. But then his fiancée had 1 semester to go in college, and it's like, semester's 3 months, son. Just wait 3 months and get married in May or June when everyone else gets married, right? He had this amazing answer. Dad, you've taught me my whole life it's better to marry than to burn, and I am on fire. Well, son, let's get you married at Christmas time, right? Awesome. Wow. But I think culture has changed there. You know, I looked and I looked for survey after survey after survey, trying to find a survey that said that there were at least 10% of young people who were waiting till marriage to be sexually active. Couldn't find one. Most surveys put it at 2 to 3%. The only notable exception the sociologists found were from those kids who came from families that were, in their words, rigorously religious families. Thank God I built one of those, right? Rigorously religious families. But even so, that percentage barely climbed above 15%. I think there's a lot against our kids, right? And we as parents owe it to our children to make some significant investments so that they're able to bridge this gap successfully, right? I have a lot of friends that are my age. That makes sense, right? And so I have this conversation a lot. Kids, we all have kids in our 20s, right? My youngest, I'm going to call him out. He turns 25 today. Everyone give Gabe a hard time. He's sitting at that back table. Awesome. Turned 25. That means I'm really old when my youngest is 25 years old, right? And so my kids span a decade, and so all this generation I'm talking about, all my kids are kind of in that generation, right? And so we have this conversation, and if I were to distill all those conversations down to one like analogy, it would be this. My friends would essentially say, when our kids were born, it was like we did what everyone else did. We put them on the conveyor belt, right? And this conveyor belt is meant to take them to a destination, right, where they, into adulthood, right? And so when we first put them on the conveyor belt, it's all about survival skills. Don't touch a hot stove, don't walk across the street, that sort of stuff. And then they get into school, and it's about life skills, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then they get into middle school and high school, and it's about all how to manage their peer relationships and to have wisdom and discernment. And you taught all that stuff, right? And then they walk down the aisle and they wear the funny hat and you all celebrate and they go off to college. And moms probably don't do this, but I know dads do. A clock starts in our head. In somewhere between 48 and 60 months, they're going to be off my payroll. That's what we think, right? We're going to send them off to college and they're going to go through a 4-year college and then they're going to get out and they're going to get a job. They're going to buy a house, to settle down, get married at some point. And we just kind of have that expectation, right? And so here's what I hear from my friends these days. We don't know what happened, but it's like the conveyor belt stopped running. It's like my kids, I don't know how to help them. My kids are just like stuck. And so we're going to have a family conversation about how to get the conveyor belt running and keep it running, right? And I do think that God has a plan for this. See, here at Bay Life, if you're visiting and maybe you're not sure if the church thing is for you or you haven't yet begun a relationship with Jesus, it's okay because the principles we're going to share, I assure you, will work if you use them regardless of what your relationship with Jesus is. Okay, these just work. And so I want to take us to a group of chapters in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is a book of wisdom. It's just amazing. Chapters 3 through 8, so 5 chapters, are like a parenting primer, right? And anything you need to know about parenting, I promise, is in those 5 chapters. You ought to go home as parents and read it. I don't care what age your kids are. Maybe they're all grown and gone. Read those 5 chapters. They're really, really helpful. How do we keep the conveyor belt running, right? Well, I can tell you it won't happen without instruction. Parental instruction is what drives the conveyor belt. Okay, it's what keeps it rolling. All right? That instruction has to be done a certain way, right? And so in Proverbs 6, he lays out what the plan is for that instruction. I just want to kind of buzz through this real quick, follow along on the screen. It says, my son. Now, obviously here, this is a father instructing a son, but it's sons, daughters, doesn't matter. It's not gender specific. my son, my children, keep your father's commandment. Now, why does it attach father to commandment? Because commandments are the big ones. Those are the guardrails. Those are the primary parameters. Dads, you're biblically responsible for that. These are the rules of the house, right? They're not many, but they're really, really important. Like we don't lie, cheat, and steal. We don't do anything that would impugn the integrity of you as a person or of our family name. We don't do things like get addicted to drugs or substance of any kind. We're going to save ourselves until God gives us the one that we're going to marry and stay with them for life. I mean, these are the big parameters, right? The big rocks. Dad, that is your responsibility. You're the one that has to lay that down and make sure that your kids understand what the commands of the house are, right? Now, for the ladies, these are the really important people in the room. When it comes to parenting, I'm just telling you, I view myself as a pretty engaged dad and granddad. I am a distant second to the investment that my wife has made, okay? The first question any of my grandkids ask me when I pick them up is, Papa, where's Dee Dee? Right? That's just how it is. It's always been that way. But my son, keep your father's commands, learn the big ones, and forsake not your mother's teaching. That's the daily application of the commands, right? My wife made huge inroads with daily teaching. How important are these two if you're a young person, if you're in that 15 to 25 range? How important is this stuff? Bind them on your heart always. Right here. It's an analogy, right? It's spiritually, they ought to be in your heart. Tie them around your neck. It gives us something as dads to grab onto in those moments, right? Remember that command? What do we say about that? Do we do that in the Pipping house? No, we don't, right? Tie them around your neck. Passage goes on. Here's the benefit. When you walk, they will lead you. See, you can't be with your kid wherever they go. You're not going to college with them. I hope you're not one of those parents. Let them go on their own, right? When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. They will protect you. When you awake, they will talk to you. Just pause there for a moment. Parents, the whole goal of parenting is to implant the little voice in their head that will counsel them when you're not there, right? That's the goal, right? To get the voice in their head. For the commandment, what dad lays down is a lamp. It lights the way, right? And the teaching, what mom gives on a daily basis, is a light. And here is the consequence if we don't listen then. The reproofs of discipline are the way of life, right? Dad, mom, there has to be an accountability process if they don't listen to the voice in their head, right? If they're not listening to you. So it all begins with instruction. We've got to get that because instruction is mobile. It goes with them. It's in their heart. It's around their neck. It's the voice in their head, right? It has to be intentional. That instruction is so important. Learning to be an adult is not an intuitive process. You have to fight against culture. You have to fight against their flesh and their heart within them. You have to fight against everything to instill in them the voice that's going to counsel them and lead them and protect them, right? So, what does God have to say about the life skills? What are the tools that need to go in the toolbox? If you spent time, Proverbs 3 to Proverbs 8, you could find 20 or 25. I just have time to give you 3. And we're just going to kind of step through them pretty quickly. The first one would be this, and I think it's the most foundational, is you have to give them initiative. When you're instructing them, you have to talk about initiative. What is initiative? I would define initiative as a sense of industry. That voice you plant in their head has to be telling them, go to work, go to work, go to work, get a job. right? That's work ethic, right? This is one of the gifts that God gave. This didn't come after the fall. It came before the fall of man, right? Work. Why work? Why is initiative so important? Well, here at Bay Life, we believe that God made us and he hardwired us for certain things. And one of those is productivity. God made you to be productive. And when you're not productive, guess what? You're not going to be happy because you're not fulfilling the purpose that God designed you for. Are there any other reasons why initiative is so important? Right, because it adds value to your community. It makes you employable. It allows you to fulfill your divine purpose. So where do we find this in Scripture? A father instructing his son or a mother instructing her daughter about initiative, about having a sense of industry. What is that voice in their head that we put there? What should it be saying? Here it is, Proverbs chapter 6. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Wow, there's so much just in that first phrase, right? So we're assuming that this child is pretty young still, right? So my 2-year-old grandson, Ben, he's awesome. He's from the quiet family. Let's just say that. Ben is quiet. They're all cheering in the back row back there. So Ben is awesome. He came and jumped up into my arms yesterday. We were out in his backyard, and his shirt had bugs all over it. I mean, not actual bugs, but bugs were printed on the shirt. Why? Because at 2 years old, they're observing nature. They like bugs. My 4-year-old grandson, when he had his 4-year-old birthday, his parents asked him, what kind of birthday party do you want? I want snakes and turtles at my birthday. And they had pulled it off. They're handing around snakes to 4-year-olds. I'm like, what has happened to the world? Right? So use that time when your kids are small, when they're looking at nature, to teach them important lessons. Let's go out and look at the anthill. Now in Alabama, don't get too close. You'll get bit, right? But go to the ant, O sluggard. See, without instruction, this is the natural bent of every child. Now, don't call your kid a sluggard. Might give them a complex. You'll have to pay for more therapy sessions. Okay, but go to the ant, O sluggard. Why? Consider her ways and be wise. Take some notes. Look at what the ant does, right? Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest, right? It's awesome stuff. I was watching kind of one of those comedy video shows, and it actually showed an ant who had picked up another ant above its head and walked over to the edge of this big cabinet and dropped him off. I'm like, that is so awesome. You're not working, you're not with us. You go over the cliff, right? Take some notes when you're watching the ants, oh sluggard, right? Why? Because slothfulness is the natural bent of the human soul, right? So learn some things. How do you change that bent towards slothfulness? You have to give new information, right? Go take some notes, make some observations, see how they operate. For instance, see that they don't wait till winter to store up food. They do it during the summertime and the harvest, right? Learn some new things by taking in new information. You know, one of the things that I love about this passage is where it says, without having chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread. I noticed something unfortunate about the current generations that are on the launch pad, right? So many of them are sitting there waiting for someone to tell them what's next. Look at the ant. The ant isn't waiting for the boss to tell them what's next. This is what initiative is, right? It's you begin doing something and figure it out, right? Get rolling. Have some momentum, right? When I was a kid, I was working with my dad outside, and I complained that I was cold. He said, it's because you're not working hard enough, right? Create some momentum, create some heat, and that comes from having initiative, right? Well, is there a consequence to not teaching your kids to have initiative? Oh, it's big. It's big. Check this out, the next couple of verses. I love this. How long will you lie there? I just got to tell you a story. So lived in Chicago for 20 years. A lot of my friends were, we'll just say, European. And I love the Italians. They have spice, right? Not just in their food, in their mouth, in their style, right? And some of my best friends were Italians. The chairman of our elder board was an Italian. His last name was Isabelli. I mean, it's just like he ought to be making pizza when you see him. And I remember Joe held me back after an elder meeting once, and he's like, I got a question for you, Pastor. He said, I came home the other day, and nobody told me, but evidently my daughter is dating someone at college, and she brought him home. I said, oh, wow. Joe doesn't like surprises. I mean, he's just one of those guys, don't like surprises. And he said, I walked in from work, and I see a hand raised up out of my sofa. And I walked over to see who it was because it couldn't be any of my kids laying with their feet on my sofa with their shoes on. That wouldn't have happened. He goes over there and he says, there's this guy there. And he raises his hand, what's up, Mr. Isabelli? He said, I don't know. He didn't get up. He didn't look at me in the eyes. He didn't extend his hand. What's up, Mr. Isabelli? He said, my wife later told me this is my daughter's friend. He's like, is this normal? This is oldest daughter, first one to date. I said, I don't think so. That it shouldn't be normal. I thought so. I'll take care of this. He won't be a problem. I don't know. I never met the guy, so we don't know. Maybe he moved. How long will you lie there, right? Oh, sluggard, when will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Here's the consequence. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Wow. What are the consequences? The lack of initiative is self-perpetuating. See, we think it's just a season. It's just for a time. I'm just going to hang out in my mom's basement for a little bit longer. Just going to be a video gamer for another month. Then I'll get on with life. Really? This is why the Father asks, could you give me some indication of when the next season is going to begin for you? Right? How long are you going to slumber? Right? Because there's a consequence coming for you. And here's the second consequence. The consequence of a lack of initiative is disproportionate to the failure. See, the person who is slumbering and sleeping their life away, they don't think they're hurting anyone. And all of a sudden, it's like someone breaks into their house. Someone is standing in their bedroom with a gun to their head. How did this happen? Right? You know, the guy that's holding the gun, you know what his name is? Poverty. Want. That's his name. All of a sudden, you're going to need a house and you're not going to have one. You're going to need to feed your family and you're not going to be able to. Because slothfulness is self-perpetuating. It has to be stopped on purpose. So, initiative. First tool in the toolbox. Really, really critical. What's the second one? We're going to go in a totally different direction. Solomon would say the second tool in the toolbox is this one. You got to give them a moral compass. Why a moral compass? Hear me on this. Initiative creates momentum. A moral compass keeps momentum. It keeps them out of the ditch, right? You can get all the momentum. I see so many kids that have the work ethic thing down and they are blazing a trail, but they have no moral compass and they end up in the ditch created by a lack of integrity. And they lose their job. They can't figure out why they keep getting fired. They can't figure out why they can't keep a relationship with a person of the opposite sex going because they don't have a moral compass. Wow. Is there a cost to not having a moral compass? So I looked this up just this morning, and normally I don't try not to add stuff late in the game, but this was too good not to share. So I researched what is the difference in net worth over 10 years to someone who gets married versus someone who just lives with another person. Okay? If you just cohabitate with one other person before you get married, catch this. The difference in your net worth is $26,000 over 10 years. How about that? Now, if you cohabitate with multiple people before you get married, the cost to your net worth is $33,000 over, say, oh, we're not hurting anyone. You're hurting yourself, right? You can have all the initiative in the world, but no moral compass, and you end up in poverty, right? Well, what should a parent do? What are the instructions we need to give? In Proverbs chapter 7, and I'm just going to tell you on the front end, it'll use a female pronoun to describe kind of the seductive world system that's out there. It's not a slam on women, please hear me. A few chapters later, it's going to talk about wisdom being the greatest thing. It also uses a female pronoun, but it's an analogy, right? So Proverbs chapter 7 says, with much seductive speech, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. What's the challenge in giving a moral compass to your kids? Hear me on this, right? The pull of the world is always stronger than an undisciplined soul. They will go down if you don't help to discipline their soul with the word of God. I want to move on to verse 22. It says this, all at once, he follows her. As an ox goes to the slaughter, as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know it will cost him his life. Right? An undisciplined soul has massive blind spots. Dad, I don't know how it happened. I just ended up here. I don't know how I got fired for the third time. I don't know how my girlfriend is pregnant, Dad. I don't know how that happened. Well, that's a different conversation. But all at once, right? From their perspective, it happens all at once. Why? Because an undisciplined soul has massive blind spots. It doesn't see it coming, right? How do you produce a disciplined soul? Here it is, verse 24. And now, O sons, listen to me. Be attentive to the words of my mouth. Are you one of those parents that allows your kids to walk away while you're instructing them? Don't be that person. Don't be that. Chase them down. It may take me a while to catch you, but you'll regret it. Right? You will watch me, and don't allow them to roll their eyes either. Right? Sit them down. We're going to, face to face, give me eye contact, and then test the assimilation of what you lay down. Tell me back what you just heard me say. When you're giving them the car keys for the first time. Okay, I'm the dad, I'm setting down the commands that come with these keys. Tell me back what you just heard. Okay? We're going to chase some hypothetical situations to make sure you can apply what you just heard. Right? Then there are some practical things that we have to do when it comes to moral compass, right? Verse 25, next verse. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. What is he saying? You've got to have some rules about proximity, the people who are bad for you, and the path that they're on. Don't hang out with people that are bad for you. Elsewhere in the Proverbs, it says, the companion of fools will suffer harm, right? Don't hang out with them, and don't get on the path that they're on. I know there are probably a lot of T Swift fans in the crowd, so please don't send me emails about this. But I thought it was an interesting pick for Woman of the Year. A 33-year-old, single, perpetually promiscuous billionaire. This is what the world is saying our daughters ought to become, right? Now, hey, this is a perfect illustration of someone with a high sense of initiative and industry. She became a billionaire in her 30s. No moral compass. Must have both, right? Must have both. Why? The very next verse will tell you why. If you stay with that person and you stay on the path that they're on, guess what happens next? For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. There is nothing good on the other side of that. Stay away from the person and the path, right, that are going to take you down. Parents, don't let your kids, you're a fool if you let your kids pick their own friends, right? They can pick them, you have to approve them, right? And you have to have that loving conversation. We love that person. We care about that person. We want that person to meet Jesus and to become a different type of person. But until that occurs, you're not hanging with them. Not unless you're in my house and I'm present, right? One last one, and we'll be done. It's this. It's the one that you least expect. Number 3, financial wisdom. I don't know why we don't spend more time on this as parents, maybe because of our own financial mistakes, or maybe we think that it's just intuitive. They'll pick it up along the way. This requires immense intentional instruction. There are really 2 instructions given that parents need to pass on to their kids. What are they? The first is honor God with the first fruits that God blesses you with, right? Give the tithe. Isn't that interesting? As you read chronologically through Proverbs, the very first thing he says about money is honor God with what he gives you. Check it out in Proverbs 3, verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Why? Because Jesus matters most, right? That tithing teaches us that on the first day of the week, the first financial decision we make is to honor God. What does God promise in return? It's pretty good. Check it out. Then your barns will be filled to plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine, right? Prosperity's on the other side. Do we give to be prosperous? No, it's just a side benefit, right? We give to honor God. And then he blesses that discipline. There's one other thing that Proverbs tells us that as parents we ought to lay down for our kids in instruction regarding finances. And it's this. Stay away from debt. If you can avoid it altogether, that's awesome. But if you're in it, get out of it as quickly as you can, right? Let's look at this. My son, if you've put up security, if you've signed for a neighbor, have given your pledge for a stranger, if you're snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself. Get out of that as quickly as you can. Why? Check this out. For you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Elsewhere in the Proverbs, it says, the borrower is the lender's slave. How about this? Let's teach our kids we never borrow on things that depreciate, right? If we just started with that, right? We don't borrow on stuff that we know is going down, right? Any investment can go sideways on you. We understand that. But Be very careful. Proverbs 6, verse 3 to 5 talks about what to do if we're in debt, right? Go, hasten, plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes not sleep and your eyelids no slumber. I've told others that means work 2 jobs. You work both shifts, right? Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of a hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Run from that. Folks, some of this has been fun to laugh at. Others has been fairly convicting for me too. I have not done this perfectly. But hey, if we can give them initiative and we can give them a moral compass and we can give them financial wisdom, they have a real shot to make it to the end of the conveyor belt, right? I just want to close by praying for our kids. And your kids may be small, your kids may be junior high school, your kids may be adulting already. We're going to pray for our kids right now. Would you join me? Father in heaven, I just pray, God, that you would give us the grace in instructing our kids to be kind, to be loving, to be intentional. Father, help us to own our own mistakes. Help us to confess in front of our kids when we have blown it. Help them to be able to learn from our mistakes. But Father, I pray that our kids, not just so they'll launch, God, that's just such a small goal, but so that they will live purposeful, joy-filled lives. God, this is our only desire for our kids. Father, I pray for those that may feel a little stuck right now. God, I just pray that hopefully some of the wisdom of God's word would buoy them along in their journey. Father, I pray for the parents who feels frustrated or like a failure. God, I pray against that. May we just be proactive. May we learn from what may have gone imperfectly and continue to work toward redemptive outcomes. Father, I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Love you guys. We'll see you next week.